Hello, folks. Welcome to Between Awesome and Disaster. This is your host, Will Carey. Thanks for tuning in. I appreciate you being here and hope you're doing well. And I hope you're staying inside as much as you can. And you're wearing a mask when you have to. So thank you for being here, everybody. This is a fun episode of the show. This is one that this should have happened a lot sooner than it did, but because of the nature of the world and the way I'm able to record and reach out to guests now, it is happening now, and I'm excited to share it with you guys. My guest on the show today is one of my closest friends from the Baltimore comedy scene, comedian and writer and filmmaker Mike Finazzo. Mike and I met when we were incredibly new neophyte stand-up comedians. I started doing stand-up in 2007, and Mike started shortly after me, and we met around the same time when we were still kind of just figuring out like who we were on stage and trying to get funnier and write better jokes. And I moved to New York City shortly after a couple years into doing stand-up, and Mike is still in Baltimore, and I hadn't talked to him for a while about comedy or about his filmmaking pursuits, and we're going to talk about that extensively on this episode because there's a lot of great stuff that I want to make sure you guys are aware of. But Mike is a dear friend, and I was really happy to get to talk to him. This episode was actually recorded on my 34th birthday, April 23rd, 2020, in quarantine here in Astoria. My birthday was very nice considering the circumstances. I was able to, my fiance was able to track down all of my favorite foods and made a delicious white chocolate raspberry cheesecake, which didn't make it through the weekend, I don't think. No, it definitely did not. So I'm very fortunate that I not only am in the circumstances that I am, but that I was able to have the birthday that I could because of my delightful fiance. And I'm grateful and appreciative every day when I wake up for where my life is right now, which is more on the awesome side of a disastrous time for the world. But that's what we're gonna. But today I'm going to talk to Mike Finazzo, which Mike has written and directed two feature films, Wits End, which I believe is available on YouTube, and then his most recent feature film, Bored in the USA, which is a beautifully shot black and white movie, like indie comedy drama, is actually available on Amazon Prime. You can stream it there now. And Mike and I took very different paths in our careers in comedy. We started in stand-up. I landed in podcasting and stand-up, and Mike landed in writing and directing. And we're going to talk a little bit about the journey here. So thank you guys for listening, and I hope you enjoy this. If you want to share this with a friend, we are available wherever you get your podcasts. So, but let's get into it. Let's go to my chat with my buddy, comedian, director, Mike Finazzo. All right, and here we go. Mike Finazzo, how are you doing, man?
I'm doing good, buddy. It's been a long time. It's nice to hear your voice.
Likewise, dude. I always felt like of all of the comics that I knew in Baltimore, I always felt like a particularly strong bond and friendship with you, man. So it's good to hear from you as well. I don't think I've seen you since uh, it might have been since you scanned your movie at the Creek a few years ago.
That was the last time I was actually in New York. I was supposed to go up there one other time since then. It got canceled at the last minute. But yeah, I haven't been up there. So yeah, and I don't remember the last time you were down here. So that probably was the last time I've actually seen you. Um, so yeah, it's been 3 years, I guess, 4 years maybe.
Something like that. Yeah, I haven't performed in Baltimore in a really long time. I think the last time I did a show proper in Baltimore, I was probably headlining T Brad's old show, Drink Till We're Funny, which is no longer in existence. I
Oh, yeah, that's I think I was there too when you headlined Drink Till We're Funny. And yeah, that closed. Well, he doesn't even live here anymore. But yeah, the it's been a few years since that show existed, so it's been a while.
yeah, I like have no, but I always still hold a kind of fondness for that show because that show is the reason I even was able to try doing stand up comedy, and I believe we met at that show also, and I think the story of how we met I always love because it doesn't sound like the kind of story that starts like a long friendship, but I find it hilarious.
Well, yeah, so I it is a little bit of a blur. I think I did meet you at High Tops. It was either that or Singers. Because I remember I know I met you and Brian Preston around the same time, and he's still one of my really good friends as well. And
Mm-hmm.
um, yeah, and man, there was a lot of really bad bar shows back then. And to clarify, Drink Till We're Funny was not one of them. Drink Till We're Funny was actually a very good show.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Um, but yeah, there were some bad ones that were way more traumatizing that I trauma bonded and many great local comedians with over.
Oh yeah, and especially like when you first start doing when you first start doing comedy, and there's kind of like a sincerity to it because you're just doing it because you're interested and for the love of it, and you're just searching for like the first joke that's going to work, or like maybe the first couple of jokes, like that first 5 minutes. And
Right.
I think I remember, and I had very few social graces when I started doing stand up. And I think so by the time I left Baltimore for New York, I was maybe 2.5 years in by that point, maybe almost three. And I remember you had this joke about Blumpkins, and I think you were probably even you might have been even newer into stand up than me at that point, maybe like a year. And I think I just walked up to you and said, "That's the second time I've heard that joke. It went better. People laughed this time," or something to that effect.
You know what? I didn't remember that till just now, but that is 100% accurate. You did say that, and you were probably right. I think that if you would have heard it a third time, there would have been even less laughs. It was definitely diminishing returns on that one, which is shocking for the great Blumpkin hit. Um,
Right.
yeah, there's a lot of stuff that, and I actually think that with stand up, I'm really proud of most of it. Like I could say that I have a lot of really good bits that are unique to my personality, and I ended up getting into like a lot of like storytelling and stuff that I'm really proud of. But there's some definitely some big swings that are really cringy. That yeah, I when you said Blumpkins, my face turned blood red. So,
Well, I'm trying to well, even back in those days, like I would straight up do like a Dimitri Martin or Mitch Hedberg impression on stage. I wouldn't I wasn't doing any of their jokes, but that I was doing like
the Kate,
their
I do remember
cadence.
you had a very like Hedbergy like cadence when you first started,
Yeah, that
and yeah, I always remember Will Carey what the and you had these great one-liners, and it was like Hedberg in like the best way because you had really clever jokes. But yeah, you definitely had a Mitch vibe, which I think a lot of folks do, and I mean I'm sure I ripped off the cadence of all of my heroes at one point or another. So
Oh yeah. I not too dissimilar to like when you play guitar, you sound and learn kind of the riffs and patterns of bands you like. Um, for me at least, like having that cadence that was kind of like my armor. That was my courage to be able to get on stage before and be somewhat comfortable. Because when you get on stage as a stand up for the first time, it is such an alien, uncomfortable feeling. And the only way I've found that goes away is to just do a lot of stand up comedy to the point
mhm.
where being on stage with a microphone is second nature. And then you that's when the work of like, okay, let's work on delivery and writing of the jokes, and how they go together, and so that I can worry less about that kind of stuff, you know?
Right. Yeah, and that's the thing I always loved about. Sorry, there's a fire. I hope my house isn't on fire, but
Okay.
I'm sure we're fine.
This is
Um,
not this is not the first time a fire alarm has gone off while I've been doing a
oh, good.
podcast.
It stopped, so I assume my family's alive. But uh, that's the thing I always loved about stand up is there was no cheat code to it, and it's very obvious who's faking it. And I think that like the people that are really good at it got really good at it because they worked their asses off and did a ton of stand up and and put sometimes decades into finding their voice. And um yeah, like the only way you really can shed all that stuff is just by getting on stage a million times. And that's yeah, that's just the great thing about stand up.
And absolutely. And I think you did that too, because you were always somebody that I looked up to and admired because of your work ethic. Like you did tons of sets. You had the I'm going to do it myself kind of uh, stick to itiveness before it became the thing that everyone did. Like you were recording albums and releasing and promoting your own stuff uh, before it became, I think, easy to do it or
Yeah,
easier to do it.
before yeah, everybody had a stand-up special and had a YouTube video that they called a stand-up special. And which I'm all for people making things, but yeah, I when I and my CD isn't even good, and that's how old it is. It's a CD. It's
Right.
not it's not an MP3 or it was actually a compact disc.
I
But
have one.
yeah, you have a physical copy of it. You're one of the dozen. But yeah, I really worked hard that first few years of stand up. Um and that is like one of the things I'm proudest of is you know back when I was doing it, and it's different for I'm sure like a lot of folks are listening to this that are comedians, and a lot of them are probably in New York. And in New York, you could always do 5 sets a night. Like they might not be
Hmm.
great sets. You might have to pay for some to get on stage for some of them, or it might just be for comics. But when I started doing comedy, I was in Baltimore, and there was no such thing as doing 3 sets a night. So it's like for me, there was a lot of zigging and zagging where it's like I would do a set in Virginia, then I would do a set in DC, and then I would do a set in Baltimore. And that's the way I would get like 2 or 3 sets or 4 sets in a night, by just putting hundreds of miles on my car in a night and doing that every night of the week.
Yeah.
So yeah, I definitely grinded the first few years doing stand up, and I worked really hard and put together a few hours of original material, which some of it hasn't aged well, but for the most part, I'm really proud of it. And um, yeah, and I put that all out myself. And it was kind of like before everybody was doing that, which was like my first CD was in 2012, I think, or
Yeah.
13, maybe 2012. I think the first CD came out, and that was kind of like right before like it was like you said, it was kind of like really easy to do.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, man, I remember, and then I also some of my fondest memories of those times are, because from what I've picked up, it's kind of in Baltimore now. It's a lot easier to do multiple sets in and stay in kind of the Baltimore City, Baltimore County area. But if anyone is listening to this, when Mike and I were becoming comedian becoming comedians, like in 2008, 2007, around that time, that was not the case. You could do one mic on Sundays, which was Drink to or Funny back when it was at Damon's Bar and Grill, and then later High Tops. You could do New Talent Night at Magooby's Joke House, and you could go down to the College Park area to do Irwin Long's rooms.
Yeah.
Or if you knew somebody, maybe you could get a guest spot at the Comedy Factory. But even that was kind of hit or miss.
Yeah, and there was like you could do a bringer show at Magoobies, like that was the other end, right?
Yeah, that
Um,
yeah, I think maybe my one of my early sets was like I had 10 people at Magoobies and I won.
because I remember you won the contest. That was right.
Yeah, way before I was ready, and that was when you would get the hosting spot. And then I just had a really rough weekend hosting shows at the old Magoobies location
Right, right.
with Lord Corrette, who could not have been nicer. Lord was great, but I was just not ready to be a host yet.
Yeah, and then eventually that became like just guest spots, and which is still like great and valuable. But yeah, I think he got burned a few times by having people that were talented, and obviously they had enough jokes to like win a contest, but like hosting for 200 people is a different thing.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, but yeah, you're right. You couldn't even do comedy every night. Like I think when I started, it was High Tops on Sunday, Singers was Wednesday,
Oh
and
yeah,
then
singers.
I eventually started Sidebar on Monday nights, and that became a weekly open mic. And I really just started that just to get stage time. And then within a few years of that, DC really blossomed and had multiple rooms a night, and you could go there and do a lot of sets. And yeah, but Baltimore, from what I've heard, is you could well, you can't get up anywhere now, but pre-COVID, you
Yeah.
could get up every night of the week.
Oh yeah, exactly. I don't know if this is happening where you are, but the clubs and the producers have adapted. You can do your Zoom shows and do your jokes to silence in your apartment because everyone is muted. Or there are some clubs that are charging for virtual Zoom open mics, but they're portraying it as like an audition, and it's gross. A lot of it I find really
That's
gross and desperate.
man, I watched, and I don't want to on anybody, but I watched a few seconds of a Zoom improv show,
Oh yeah,
and I'm already uncomfortable watching bad improv, and you add bad Wi-Fi to that, and
sure.
and awkward silences, and it's even worse. Um, but then yeah, I've heard of the Zoom stand-up shows and how that's become a thing, and our mutual friend Brian Preston was telling me that one of the most awkward things is local comedians complaining that they're not getting booked on Instagram live shows, which made me laugh. And yeah, it's the pandemic can't stop the pettiness of not getting booked on an unpaid bar show. So
Exactly. It's like you can turn your Zoom on and just talk into it. It's exactly the same
yeah,
thing as being on a booked Zoom show. Um, I'm honestly and not that you and I are famous, but I'm glad I'm at a place now with my career and with my creativity where I'm not upset about things like that.
no, yeah, I mean, and to be honest, and I haven't like I don't really consider myself a stand-up anymore. Like I haven't done it probably like a year and a half at this point. Um, but yeah, and I think that like part of that like came with just like age, and also just like I only want to do things that are fun, and I want to let go of like the pettiness and the being envy of somebody else getting an opportunity and stuff like that. So yeah, that was something the kind of attitude that you talk about. It's something that I'm glad I haven't had in a while. Um, but I'm sure it could return any second.
Totally. Now, I kind of want to trace this a little bit because if I can make a bold comparison, and this would have played very differently a couple of years ago if we were doing this podcast. Um,
Hmm.
if if I'm looking at like your career trajectory and mine, it's almost like like you later on, we started in stand up. You went on to be like a feature filmmaker, and I went on to do podcasts. So it's we're of Baltimore, of the Baltimore like open mic comedy scene. It's like I feel like I'm the Marin of that scene, and then you're like the Louis C.K. of that scene.
I
Hopefully there
knew this
aren't
was coming
and
too.
hopefully there aren't any terrible stories. I can't imagine there are, because you're a really
Hey,
nice guy. But
when those allegations from 10 years ago resurface, I'm going to be doing stand up again. No, I'm just kidding. But um,
that's how you're
um,
gonna announce your return.
yeah, man, that's a fandom that hasn't aged well.
No, definitely
But
not.
no, and yeah, that is weird because like being and like you know, and not just doing stand up, I was such a comedy nerd and still am in a lot of ways. And you know, I loved Mark Maron like before he blew up and still do. And like I'm so happy for his success. Like
Yeah,
I think like a few years ago, like the podcast being big and him doing and selling out clubs was, oh man, he made it. And now that dude's in Oscar winning movies and getting nominated for awards for Glow, and he's really good on those things. Like
yeah.
I love the movie Sword of Trust, and he's great in it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and yeah, so but I never would have thought that he would have eclipsed Louis C.K. in terms of success, and I wouldn't have thought that it took forcing women to watch him jerk off to put Louis below Mark Maron
R-
in that battle for superiority.
e-
But
exactly.
yeah,
Like for Louis
yeah,
C.K. and like Carlos Mencia to be on kind of like the same, obviously very different reasons why they're reviled in the greater comedy community, but for them to be in that at that same level of they've got their diehard fans and can still do like uh and can still do like certain comedy clubs. Well, Louis can do like somewhat bigger theaters, but this was not the reality I was envisioning when I started doing stand up 13 years ago. You know what I mean?
yeah, and that's a good analogy too. I think. Yeah, and it's also weird because you look at like other people that have dropped for you know whatever reason. Like I think of like somebody like Dane Cook, who like I'm not even like a fan of,
Mm-hmm.
but like he never bothered me. Like people hated Dane Cook for a while, and like looking back on it, it's like why? Like because you don't like his stand up? Like that's just don't watch it. Like the guy's not a villain. Like so like to see like somebody like that like get shit on because like people don't think he's funny or like and obviously some people do think he's funny. The guy sold out arenas, but yeah, like that guy got shit on because he was famous when then it's like, oh yeah, there are people that should be shit on because they're joke thieves or they're sexual predators or they're literally serial rapists like Bill Cosby,
Right.
you know. So it's just weird how like the fall from grace comes in so many different ways for all those guys. And the point I'm trying to make is I have no allegations. Will's analogy was faulty from the start, and I am a family man.
Yeah. Yes. And I want to talk about a bit later. I kind of want to trace this a little bit. So were you born and raised in Baltimore? Like, have you been in Baltimore your whole life?
Pretty much, yeah. I grew up in Baltimore County, a small area called Halethorpe, which is like right by like UMBC. So
Mm-hmm.
I've lived within about 20 minutes of there basically my whole life.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So to me that so like the Baltimore County area when I moved here from Calvert, which is about an hour south, I like Towson to me is like a massive metropolis. I was just overblown, like
Right.
overwhelmed by the fact that I could walk to a Barnes and Noble. I could barely handle it. It was amazing. um,
Yeah. And that's like the interesting thing because I actually grew up like my parents have like always lived here and like they've never traveled and like for them like driving 10 minutes to go from Arbutus to Glen Burnie is like a huge trip. So like in a lot of ways like it wasn't until like later that I did realize that like oh man Baltimore City's awesome. and like, oh, I can go to Philadelphia. That's an hour and a half away. That's pretty cool. And to see, so like I didn't grow up in like that small area like you did, but I kind of had a similar experience of like going to like the third biggest city in a state and being like, man, this is like Frederick is crazy, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, same. Like when I had my college girlfriend was in from Frederick, so I drove up there once, and I was just like, "Oh my God, mountains! This is still the same state." Because
Right.
my parents, we never really traveled either. Like we would our vacation was, I later found out, like a timeshare in Virginia, and I didn't even put together like, oh, why do we have to go to these meetings? Like I just want to hang out in the hot tub. Like I couldn't put that together. It was until like years later I was like, oh man, my vacation. And then like I remember being excited to like, oh, I want to go get something at like the Virginia Walmart. Like I had no. It wasn't until, and God bless my fiance. Like it wasn't until I met her that I like really saw the world, with the exception of like one trip to Cannes in 2010. So you're, and what was your home life like growing up? Because I've known you for a while, but I don't know if I like have ever met your parents or know anything about them.
Yeah, so my parents are still around. Um, so I won't talk too much about them because your podcast is blowing up on Stitcher. You never know who's listening.
It's true. You could just tell
Um,
me like what did they do for a living?
yeah, yeah. My parents are good people. My dad has worked the same company forever, and basically he works. Um, it's a office furniture company, and he does like contracts for like the federal government, like sourcing, um, office furniture to government buildings. And my mom is a hairdresser and has owned her own business for 30 years or something like that.
Oh, that's great. Now this makes sense. I'm tracing this as two parts of your later personality because um, I take issue, and this applies mostly with comics, but also just society in general. You have, I imagine you come into people that kind of have this just air of entitlement, or like, I just deserve things because I do, like that sort of thing. I people have never kind of had to like work or want for much, and uh this and I it took me a while to appreciate like the value of hard work, like and stand up comedy will certainly show you the value of that as well, because if you bomb enough you'll like, oh, I need better jokes. But kind of tracing like, if your mother's a business owner, you're effectively a business owner as a comedian. The threads I'm beginning to trace here. And did you have siblings?
Yeah, so and real quick, like that's funny you mentioned that. I've thought of that before in terms of like I do have this like almost like blue collar like work ethic when it comes to stuff. Without trying to make that sound like overly like folksy or like salt of the earth or whatever. But like I know what it's like to grow up poor. Like we lived in basically Section 8 housing when I was a kid. My parents
Mm-hmm.
had to work for everything, and even my mom owned her own business and was a hairdresser and did well for herself. And my dad didn't have a high school diploma and got a GED like later in life, which is how he worked his way from like a warehouse to um, pretty high up in a successful company and stuff. So it's like I definitely know what it's like to like see people work really hard. So I definitely think that rubbed off. I also went to have you ever heard of Cardinal Gibbons High School? It doesn't exist anymore, but when you lived in Maryland, did you ever hear of that?
Maybe, I'm not sure.
Yeah, it's like semi-famous because it's the grounds where Babe Ruth went to school
Mm-hmm.
in like the early like 1900s. But it turned into a Catholic high school, which it's where I went, and basically it was the school where it was like the shittiest school in the archdiocese because it was where basically kids who were rich kids that weren't smart enough to get into better schools, or their parents went to Gibbons when it was good. or it was folks that were too afraid to send their kids to a school in Baltimore City because they
Right.
thought Baltimore City public schools weren't great. Um, and yeah, so I went to school there. Basically, I was like uh looked at as like white trash by a lot of kids like in my school. So I definitely know what it's like to be around that sense of entitlement, be around folks that like haven't necessarily worked hard,
Right.
but also have seen a lot of people that have worked their asses off to be successful. So yeah, I definitely um, know what that's like, and I definitely think like working hard at like either comedy or movies or whatever it's been in my life, kind of like consciously or not, comes from that. Um, to answer your other question, I have a half sister. My mom was married before, and
Hmm.
I have a half sister that's about 10 years older than me. So I don't really have a lot of like memories of like growing up with a sister. Like she moved out by the time I was like 8. So
Sure.
for all intents and purposes, I was like an only child.
Hmm. Yeah, I'm an only child, so I can kind of relate to that sort of like uh, that sort of feeling of like just kind of being alone. And occasionally your parents will interact with you, but I spend a lot of time like in my head or entertaining myself or keeping myself occupied. Does any of that sound familiar to you?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, there was a lot of occupying myself, and also like that was where I fell in love with movies at a young age. And
Hmm.
yeah, we didn't have a lot of money, so there was no, you know, going places, or there was no summer camp. Like, I was usually left to my own devices, a lot. So yeah, definitely that's where the creative side of things probably started, and my love of like movies and even comedy, you know, um some comedy albums probably snuck in there, um, like I know like Judd Apatow talks about that a lot, but it's something that always resonated with me, and I'm sure resonated with you. Was the remember the Freaks and Geeks episode where Martin Starr like comes home and he's like eating the grilled cheese and watching like uh Gary Shandling on like TV and stuff, but he's just by himself because mom's at work.
Yep.
Like that definitely hit really close to home for me. So yeah, I could definitely little bit of the introspective stuff and the creative stuff definitely probably started there.
Yeah, that makes sense. Because I would like when I was in middle school, basically from middle school through high school, I would get home before either my parents did because my dad was a shift worker at a nuclear power plant, and my mom was an elementary school teacher, so they get out later in the day. So I would basically just kind of be by myself for a couple of hours, and and even then, because like we didn't have cable or satellite after a certain point, just because I don't know if like my parents just couldn't be bothered to fix it or if it was a money thing, but I was just kind of like watching like the stuff that I had recorded off of TV, and like I played Metal Gear Solid a lot, and that's a very cinematic game. So creating an imagination by myself, and it was basically what I was doing. Was the dream initially like when did you decide you were going to be in the a creative field? When did that happen?
Um, so it's interesting. I've had all these like different like I hate to say like phases, but yeah, my dad also plays music, so I definitely grew up like wanting to play music. And I started playing guitar when I was 13. I was in like a lot of bands and in high school, and I got pretty good at that for a while. Um, but yeah, so like probably like 12 or 13 is when like the creative stuff and wanting to do that probably like really started.
What kind of bands
Um,
were you in?
um, trying to think of like early. I've always been weird when it comes to music, and I think actually like I've expanded like later in life to liking actual different kinds of music. But I
Hmm.
definitely love like the my first love was the Beatles, and um, I loved a lot of old music. I was a weird kid, man. Like I went to like the BB King Blues Festival like 3 years in a row when I was in middle school, and I really thought I was going to be like a blues sensation. Um, and I'm sure if you ask my dad, like out of all the things I've tried, like guitar is by far what I'm the best at. Um, so yeah, there was yeah, blues phase and a classic rock phase, and definitely like my love of like the Beatles and Tom Petty like never left, but a lot of stuff filtered in and out.
Sure.
And then like it's weird because like later in life, in my 30s is when I've actually started buying rap albums and you know got definitely more experimental with like my musical taste.
Oh, sure. There's lots of yeah. Rap is really interesting nowadays. All of the kids, I've said this on a couple episodes recently, but all of the kids that I've learned, all the kids that would have joined like punk and hardcore bands, are rappers now. And there's like
Oh,
emo, and
absolutely.
there's
Uh,
like emo rap now. I'm really I'm really interested in it. I love that. I will never get tired of guitar and lyrics about your feelings, I guess.
right, right. That's a good way to put it. Yeah.
And what sort of comedy were you into around this time? When did the love of stand up start?
So I always loved like a lot of that actually came from my dad. My dad loved Pryor, loved Chris Rock, and I instantly like gravitated to those guys. And then when I was in middle school, it was like peak Dave Chappelle, like when he was like a big part of like the cultural
Yeah,
zeitgeist. And a friend of mine, who like never tried comedy or anything, but he's a really funny guy, that I just worked with, and I were like super into Chappelle, like even like before like Chappelle show, and then that blew up. I was really into.
I might have lost you for a second there.
Oh, can you hear me?
Oh yeah, you said you were really into Chappelle.
Yeah, I was really into Chappelle, like even before like Chappelle show. Um, yeah, like high school was like peak for like Half Baked and his stand up, and like Killing Me Softly is still one of my favorite stand up specials. And he's still the only stand up that gets me excited about comedy. Like I think there's a million stand up specials now, but I think the only ones I've watched are the new Chappelle specials from the last few years.
Yeah,
Um, I I loved I don't know if you remember him, but Stephen Lynch I was a big fan of
yeah, I
for a
remember.
time.
I remember Stephen Lynch.
Yeah, I thought he was really funny. And yeah, and then it was weird because like we talk about like Marin, I was like a big fan like before he really blew up with the podcast. I forget the name of it. What was the album Mark Maron had? It was like his divorce album. It
Final
was like the dub
engagement.
Final Engagement, yeah, where it's like in the half sold out club. Like I loved that album so much. And yeah, that was even like I think that might have been like right before the podcast um
Yeah,
or even like before he got big. And it's obvious because of the album he talks about how he's a failure like every 5 minutes because
yep,
he keeps telling jokes and keeps saying, and I'm doing it in front of a half filled house.
yeah,
Um, but yeah, so I love Marin, and I loved. What's weird is I actually like really got into Louis C.K. and the way I had heard of him was I don't know if you remember the YouTube video of Dane Cook steals from Louis C.K. where it was
yeah,
like the three bits, but that was how I heard of Louis C.K. It was like they had like the three similar premises, and I was like, oh, this guy's funnier, and I got into his stuff, and I think that was like around when like Chewed Up came out, the Lucky Louie show came out, and I got into his stuff, and
yep.
um, but so yeah, like yeah, there's a lot of guys I really liked. I loved Greg Giraldo too, as somebody I was huge into.
Yeah, Greg was great. Um, I remember somebody that I didn't appreciate until later, until because lots of the greats when I was first getting into stand up took me a while to appreciate and laugh. Maybe I had to grow age a little bit, but Dave Attell. Um, is still such a brilliant comic. I saw him at Caroline's a few years ago and laughed harder than I had in a long time. It was pretty
Yeah,
great.
I saw him at Magooby's a few years ago, and he's like pound for pound the best club comic still. Like he's yeah. I just remember there was what I loved about I would always go to see him on the Late Show because he would just do 2 hours and just riff and do crowd work. And
Mm-hmm.
I just remember he went to smoke during his set and his lighter wouldn't work, and somebody threw a lighter on stage, and
Uh-huh.
without missing a beat, Attell kicked the lighter away and goes, "I'm not a Guatemalan stripper," and it just made me laugh so hard.
Oh,
Uh,
that's amazing. Yeah, like just the wit is just so quick. The last time I saw him, he had this great bit about the guy who sells fruit at a fruit cart in Times Square, like at 3 in the morning. It's just like,
mhm.
it's like I'm fucking wasted. I need a peach or something like that.
And the great thing about like stuff like that, or like the stuff I would see him do on a late show, or like the crowd work, is like that stuff you're never gonna see in a special. Like that's just his brain in that moment, and it's just really fucking funny for him in the audience. But like that's not gonna go on an album or a Conan set or whatever. Like that's just him being hilarious.
Exactly, and that's when like when comics talk about like what that is what gets into what my idea of being a real comic is the skills to be able to pull that kind of stuff off. um, because that's like the magic of doing live club comedy is it's like doing theater. It's that you have these these moments that you can't replicate, irreplicable moments, and that's what's so great, and also what drives me insane about the art form sometimes as well. And and then when did you start doing comedy?
Um, 2009, I want to say.
Yeah, that
Maybe
sounds about right.
2008. It was after, I know it was, I started after you did, but yeah, I think it was definitely 2008 or 2009.
Yeah, that sounds about right because I remember like after I moved to New York, you and I, whenever we would be in each other's cities, we would have like what I think we both imagined were like the classic road comic experiences of like going to Applebee's and like hanging out and hit, or when we were in New York, we'd go and hit up a bunch of rooms and then drink really late at night. Uh, just all that kind of fun stuff that I was always so looking forward to doing, like when I first started. And I wanted to ask you because after I left New York, I feel like not terribly long after that, I think your road work started really kind of taking off, which I was super excited to see. Cause and you did a bunch of shows with Rich Vos, yeah.
I did. I was like, he was like the first person I opened up for on the road. He was really nice enough to get me some gigs. And yeah, the first time I featured for him was the Harrisburg Comedy Zone, I think. And that
Mm-hmm.
was probably like 2011. I was like 3 years in. Um, and yeah, I probably opened up for him that much. It was a lot early on, and that got me some like other opportunities. But yeah, I probably like opened up for him probably like 10 times over like a 2 year period or something like that, two or
Mm-hmm.
3 year period.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I ended up doing a good amount of road work. Um, yeah, nothing like to really brag about. Like um, a lot of comedy zones, a lot of Kazi's Comedy Club, and a lot of like B and C rooms.
But even just doing the gig I thought was cool because there are like flashy moments that you can post about on Facebook that'll get 100 likes. Like your if you make a your late night debut, or you get specials, or you open up for somebody really big, like Dennis Miller at the Lyric Opera House. That's like 200 likes on Facebook, stuff like that. But then like,
Right.
but then what I think is often underappreciated is just the sheer miracle of doing the thing consistently, like going out and doing shows and then trying to get paid after because they told you were. That's part of a that's a victory, I think, in this whole thing, man. And I find it hilarious. A couple things, because I know your stand up, and I know you as a person. Like you're not too dissimilar to me. You're pretty like down to earth, like mellow dude. So I find it interesting that you're working with like Rich Voss, and and the stand up that's compelling to you is like Chris Rock and Dave Chappelle. Like like basically like the cellar table people.
Yeah. Yeah, that is weird. And I still and I think I do like folks that are like closer to my personality too. Like I definitely went through like a big like Mike Birbiglia phase, and I think him and I are probably really similar personality wise, which is probably why I like a lot of that stuff um and drawn to it. But
Hmm.
yeah, that is, and I think like, and I never talked to like Rich Voss about this, but like I think, but I've also opened up for like a bunch of like the Joe Rogan guys. Like I opened up for Joey Diaz a bunch of times. I opened up for, um,
Oh, I love Joey.
uh, I opened up for Doug Stanhope, and I think like one of the reasons like my personality and stuff works is because it is different from those guys, and it's not gonna like step on anything that they do. Yeah, and so yeah, with like the, I wouldn't call it a friendship, but I liked Rich Voss a lot, and he was really nice to me. So, but I think that like part of that worked out because it was different from him, and I'm not going to do crowd work before his set, and I'm not going to annoy him. So I think that that is like one of the reasons like where that pairing worked. But as far as like that stuff goes, like as a comedy fan, it's also just really funny. Like I'm pretty laid back and I'm pretty chill most of the time, but there's nothing funnier than Dave Chappelle saying something totally awful.
No,
Or,
yeah, totally.
yeah.
Yeah, I agree completely. If anyone wants to be a working comic, listen to that. Not going to do crowd work before the headliner set. Not going to be annoying. Key things. One of my favorite Rich Voss memories, and I have a couple, is the weekend that one of his hecklers almost punched me in the face.
Oh,
Um,
it's the laughing
at the
devil, right?
at the Laughing Devil, which I did get.
Yeah.
Which when I had Steve Hofstetter on the show, we talked about that. That was fun. He kept the guy from punching me in the face. I appreciated that. Um, the other thing that weekend, I remember him sitting on stage, and it was maybe like Friday late show. It's maybe like a third full because it's New York and it's hard to sell out venues consistently in New York. And he was just up there like, I sold 1,000 tickets in Indianapolis. God damn it, this business makes no sense. But I'm curious, like,
Yeah.
did he ever have any like sage national headliner wisdom that he could offer you in all those gigs?
I'm sorry, you're cutting out, man.
Oh yeah. Basically, I said, did he have any like sage national headliner advice he could offer you?
Not really. But I will say, like, um, yeah, it's weird because I think that, like, with like a lot of those guys that like I was like lucky enough to like open for, like I was just like trying to like stay out of the way and just try to be nice and not try to like pester them with a million questions. With Rich Voss, it really was like one of those things to where he was like, "You're funny and you don't annoy me. Like if you want to open up for me, like here's my email." It was like that kind of thing. I actually like randomly emailed his wife like a few years later, like get advice on something, and she was really nice. And that was about opening for a particular comic that she knew, and um, what to expect and stuff like that. Yeah, it's good people, and they're super super funny.
Oh yeah, absolutely. The fact that like Bonnie, I think is a genius, and Rich, like, to do all of his albums by himself, and then to like get through recovery. Like I believe he's in recovery also. He's always super cool to me. Like I was very apologetic because me almost getting punched interrupted his set, and I was because I was like, oh, I'm sorry, your set got interrupted, and he was like, oh, I'm just glad you didn't get hurt. I was like it never occurred to me to think like that, and and I kind of am curious about your kind of transition here, like the growth of your creativity, because really enjoy your movies. It has been a while since I've seen Born in the USA, so I'm gonna probably have to rewatch it to refresh the memory. Um, but Wits End with Jason, I think that should be like an indie film festival darling. Like I think you got a great performance out of him, and I really enjoyed that movie, man. So um, how did you decide that you were going to sit down and film a and make a feature film?
Well, first of all, thank you. That's so nice, man. So yeah, so just kind of like I have to say, so movies actually came before stand up. Like I actually like tried to make a few movies like back in like the early 2000s, like 2003, 2004. And I had like a few movies fall apart, and basically, as my wife and I like talk about, like stand up became like a pretty big detour for making movies. Like it really became like stand up is like this thing I was gonna do until I do another movie. And then I ended up getting pretty good at stand up and falling in love with the process of stand up and getting booked. And like before I knew it, like 8 years went by without me like doing anything like movie related.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I'd have to say, I'm really bad at remembering years at this point, but I think it was like 2015. I had done like a shitload of stand up. It was like 300 or 400 shows a year for like a solid like 3 or 4 year period. I was doing a lot of road work, which I honestly wasn't like nuts about. Um, like we kind of touched on it earlier, but I think like early on, like road work is like so romantic and like you love going on the road to do stand up and it's cool to like middle for somebody. And after a while, like doing that, 20 times a year, it just becomes like a grind. And it's definitely on like the cusp of like this feeling of like, what do I want to do with my life? Where it's like, do I want to become a road comic? Because that's what I'm about to do. And it really wasn't. Um, and I was like, you know what? I haven't done a movie in a while. I really want to make a movie. And I got, um, and I it was one of those things where it's like I kind of like batted around ideas in my head for a while, and I wanted to make a movie so bad. And have you ever listened to Brian Koppelman's podcast, That Moment?
Yes, I think you sent me an episode of that that was I found pretty inspiring as far as like micro budget
Oh,
filmmaking.
cool. Yeah, so it's exactly what inspired me. So yeah, so that it was that episode I sent you was with Ed Burns. Um, and I was listening to that podcast. I remember it was like March, I think it was March 17th, 2015. I remember the date. I was listening to the podcast in my car, and it was Ed Burns, a great indie filmmaker, was talking about how he made a movie for no money, and he just made it with his friends, and it was just so inspiring to hear him talk about it. And anybody who wants to like make anything or even make movies, like I'd recommend them going back and listening to that podcast. So I was like, you know what, fuck it, I'm gonna make a movie. And I was in my car at work, like I drive around a lot for work, and I stopped at our office and stole a legal pad and like immediately started writing down ideas for Wits End like that day. And like by August 2015, we were shooting that movie. Um, so like that's really where that like jump from, where like movies were kind of like my first love, and have always been like the big aspiration. And I kind of like took this big detour with stand up, and it took a podcast that kind of kicked my ass into to making that movie. And um, I made that feature and made another feature and about a dozen shorts since then.
That's great, man. And what do you have your next project in mind? Like, do you want to get in? Are you trying to get into? Are you submitting to festivals? What's the your next project going to be?
So both the feature films we did, Wits End and Board in the USA, are both available for anyone to watch or stream. Um, so yeah, we're not submitting any more, them to any more festivals at this point. Um, Yeah, it's interesting. The COVID stuff and just like life over the past year has kind of slowed things up a little bit. So I did have a movie that was like pretty much ready to go, you know, that we were going to shoot in March and April, and that kind of got sidetracked. We'll make it at some point. I don't know if, when or um, if it'll be with like the same actors. But yeah, I have a few different projects that I'm working on, and it just kind of I don't know which one will come first.
Gotcha. Well, I hope that someday when the world is in a better place that we get to work together because I've always I'd love to act in a movie you to direct if I'm right for a part. that you ever write.
Oh, I'd love to have you do it, man. That would be awesome.
Yeah, that'd be great, dude. One more thing I want to ask you, and I hate to cut and run, but my fiance ordered me a giant plate of sushi for my birthday today. So I've got one more thing I
Oh,
want to.
have they?
Oh, thank you, man. So one more thing I want to ask you, and it's been really great getting to chat with you again, man. Let's not have this be the only time you're a guest on my podcast.
Yeah, we don't need to record it to talk. You know, we are friends. But
No,
yeah, it's been great catching up with you, bud.
absolutely. I wanted to ask how you're doing because your wife is expecting, yeah.
Yeah, I'm about to have my first child in about, I think, 3 weeks, May 14th,
Oh,
which in COVID time is 7 years from now.
right.
Um, yeah, so we're super excited. We're about to have a daughter, so it's my first kid and Laura's first kid, and um, it's a scary time to be going through this, but it's like the best thing that can happen to us. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, my wife and I have been together over 10 years and married for over 9 years. So we waited and waited and waited to have a child right as the world was ending. So that's kind of, typical Finazzo fashion right there.
Right. And but it sounds like you're feeling in a pretty good place about it.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, we've always wanted to have kids.
Mm-hmm.
So it's something I haven't been like really scared of. Um, we just had like some timing stuff in life, and Laura and I have both gone back to school at different times, and we've had career stuff, and um, yeah, so finally the timing was right, and well, it was right 8 months ago. Um, until the pandemic made things scary and anxious, but
Sure.
yeah, like the actual like having a kid itself, like that's not making us. I don't want to speak for my wife, but yeah, that's it's not making me anxious. It's something I'm like excited about. Um, and yeah, I hopefully like it'll just fuel creativity. I know it's gonna like add, it's gonna change timelines, and there's gonna be prioritizing, but I think it'll only like fuel creativity and make my life more enriched, which will make like the art and stuff I do better. That probably sounds like the most pretentious thing I've ever said, but I think it's true.
No, I think it is too. That's something I'm wrapping my head around more as I talk to uh, creative people that have families and they are able to balance uh, like having a family and then also having their creative pursuits as well. Because there was probably a time when I was like in my early 20s where I thought that if you and maybe that's why I was single for so long and for so frequently is that if you have a kid you can't do anything else. That's all you can do ever again. Um,
Well, you know that from having a relationship too, and like you have a great girlfriend who's about to be your great wife, and
mm-hmm.
you're because of her over the last few years, your life has gotten better and you've become more creative. You have this podcast, and you're doing all these other like cool creative things with music and comedy. So it's like I don't think a kid is different than that. Like when I met my wife, 10 years ago, my life got better. And I think this will be similar. It just changes your life in different and more interesting ways. And to me, that makes all the other stuff, more colored and full.
Yeah, that's what I think too, and I'm glad that I started realizing that because uh, Will Carey at now 34 would probably feels and is open to a lot of things that Will at 24 probably would have been like, no, this is how the world is. I figured it all out because I am 24 and I have all the knowledge.
Man, there's so many things that I figured out at 24 that I look at now, and I'm just like, I at 35, I don't know anything. Like, and I'm sure at 45, I will know even less than I do now. So, yeah,
Exactly.
sometimes you just kind of have to giggle and give in, and just kind of enjoy the ride and just take in everything. And uh, I think family and wives and kids do that.
Definitely. And the great thing about realizing you know nothing is that it's kind of freeing because you can learn new things. And that's what I'm deciding to embrace. Um, dude, this has been fantastic. It is so great to hear from you again. I will do better about being in touch. If I just have like a funny thing or a thought that I see, I'll message it to you. I'll get you. I thought I had your phone number. Maybe I don't, but I'll send you mine via DM. And where can people find your stuff if they want to check out your movies or your comedy?
Oh yeah, and same man. Let's definitely stay in touch, and I love hearing from you and talking to you. So, like I said, we don't need a podcast to do it, but if we do, that's fine too. I'm
Oh,
happy to come back on the show.
oh,
Um,
I know we can
yeah,
absolutely talk and not record it. I'm just saying that I've
right, right,
enjoyed this episode. We could do
yeah.
another if you want.
But yeah, the movie, our newest movie that we made, it's called Bored in the USA. And we haven't really talked about it, but it's a dramedy. If you like indie film and small movies where people talk, you'll probably like this one. Right now, it's on Amazon Prime, so check it out if you want. But if you go to boardintheusafilm.com, you'll find ways to watch that movie and links to our other stuff like Wits End and the short films too. So, yep, it's all there. Boardintheusafilm.com.
Awesome, man. And that sounds great. And I will make sure to I'll rewatch Born in the USA. It's a great little black and white independent flick, and I find that's like one of my favorite genres of films. So I enjoy the stuff you do, and hopefully we can do some stand up together again at some point in the future. I know the future of the comedy industry looks bleak right now, but we should just do it because we want if we want to do it. You know.
Yeah, man. And thanks for giving love to Wits End. Yeah, that's a movie that, as small as Bored in the USA is, like that movie was even more micro budget, and um, it got into some festivals, but not a ton of people saw it. But if you like, your audience, I'm sure it's a lot of comedy fans out there. If you like stand up, it's got a great stand up comedian, Jason Weems, in it, and some great performances by some other um, comics. And it's a movie about stand up comedy, so I'm sure your folks will like it.
Awesome. Yeah, check out Mike's movies, everybody. And thanks for doing this, man. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me. Well, I really appreciate it, brother.
Awesome. Stay safe, man.
You too. Thanks.
Bye. That's my buddy Mike. Very funny comic, very talented writer and filmmaker, and soon to be father. Congrats to Laura and Mike. Laura, if you're listening to this, I hope you're doing well, and congratulations. And thank you guys for listening to this. It was great to talk to Mike and catch up with him, and we will do that again soon, if not on the show, then just in life. So that's the show for today, folks. If you enjoyed this and think you have a friend who might enjoy listening to this podcast as well, we are available on Apple, Stitcher, and Spotify. You can also get a free month of Stitcher Premium when you sign up with the promo code AWESOME in all caps. That is awesome in all caps for a free month of Stitcher Premium. And thank you guys again for being here. You can follow me on Twitter at Comic Will Carey. And I'm on Instagram, willcarey23 as well. That's Carey. I also want to give a shout out to my supporter on Patreon at the awesome producer level, Mary Beth Mooney. Thank you so much for your support. I sincerely appreciate it. And if you guys are curious about some of the stuff that I've got going on over on Patreon, you can go to patreon.com/awesomedisaster. I am posting playlists. I'm doing solo podcasts about playlists. I'm doing food writing. And I've been recording some demos of songs that will probably become Bright Ugly songs in the future when we're able to do shows again. So you can listen to to those as well. I'm really having a good time putting those together. So that's what I've got going on, and I hope you guys are well. 34 is how old I am now, and what a bizarre feeling to age in this time. I feel like I've aged much faster the last few years than previously, but I'm still optimistic because that's the only way to be. I think at this time. Well, maybe it's not the only way to be, but it helps me. So, thank you guys again for listening to my show, and I will see you guys next time between awesome and disaster. Stay safe, everybody.